The wind howled across the barren Colorado plains that October night, rattling the shutters of the isolated cabin like the ghosts of dead men seeking justice. Inside, the fire burned low, shadows dancing across rough-hewn walls that had witnessed more sorrow than celebration in their 20 years of standing against the elements. Samuel, Iron Sam Crawford, sat hunched at his weathered oak table, a glass of cheap whiskey untouched before him, his calloused hands folded like a prayer he'd forgotten how to say. At 52, Sam was a man carved by loss and hardened by years of keeping the peace in territories where law was often just a word painted on a sheriff's badge. His wife Martha had been taken by consumption 3 winters ago, her coughing fits finally silenced in the depths of a February blizzard that had trapped them in this very cabin for 6 days. His deputy badge had been retired when arthritis made his gun hand too slow for the young desperados flooding west with dreams of easy money and easier violence. Now he worked a small ranch alone, existing rather than living, counting sunsets instead of blessings, measuring time in the slow decay of fence posts, in the gradual wearing away of hope. The cattle provided enough income to keep body and soul together, and the isolation suited a man who'd seen too much of humanity's capacity for cruelty. He thought nothing could surprise him anymore. He thought he'd witnessed every variation of human suffering that the frontier could produce. He thought wrong. She materialized from the storm like a vision born of desperation and dying hope, her knock so faint against the heavy wooden door that he almost missed it over the wind's mournful howling. When Sam opened that door, his breath catching in his throat at the sight before him, he found a woman who looked like she'd crawled through hell itself to reach his threshold. Her dress was torn and mud-stained, hanging in tatters that revealed more than they concealed. Her feet were bare and bleeding, leaving small crimson prints on his clean wooden floor. Dark hair hung in tangled curtains around a face that bore the unmistakable marks of recent violence. A split lip, bruising along her jaw, and eyes swollen from tears and blows alike. But it was those eyes that stopped his breath completely. Dark, haunted eyes that burned with something fierce and desperate, something that even the worst kind of suffering couldn't completely extinguish. They were the eyes of someone who'd endured the unendurable and somehow found the strength to keep fighting for one more breath, one more step, one more chance at salvation. She didn't belong in this God-forsaken place, not in the middle of nowhere, not at his cabin door. Yet there she was, trembling as though every bone in her body threatened to shatter from the cold, and whatever nameless terror had driven her through the storm to seek shelter with a stranger. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind's fury, each word a desperate prayer shaped by cracked lips and a throat raw from screaming. "I need shelter, just for tonight. I won't be any trouble." And in that moment, Samuel Crawford's quiet retirement came to an end. Sam stepped aside without question, his 20 years as a lawman having taught him to recognize victims from predators with the same instinctive certainty that warned him when a storm was brewing on the horizon. The woman stumbled inside, her bare feet leaving small tracks of blood and mud on his clean wooden floor that Martha had scrubbed smooth with lye soap and elbow grease during their brief happy years together. She stood by the dying fire, holding herself together with what looked like the last threads of her will, her entire body trembling with exhaustion, cold and something deeper that Sam recognized as the bone-deep fear that came from prolonged suffering. The firelight played across her damaged features, revealing the full extent of her ordeal in cruel detail that made Sam's jaw clench with suppressed fury. "Sit down," he said gently, indicating the chair closest to the fire. "You're safe here." She looked at him with those haunted eyes, searching his weathered face for any sign of the cruelty she'd obviously learned to expect from men. Finding none, she sank into the chair with a grateful sigh that seemed to come from her very soul. Sam moved to the stove, stoking the fire and setting a pot of water to boil. "Coffee? Or maybe some broth? You look like you haven't eaten in days." "I haven't," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not real food. They gave us scraps sometimes when they remembered we needed to stay alive." The casual way she spoke of starvation as a deliberate cruelty made Sam's blood run cold. "They?" She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly in the chair. The men who owned me, who bought and sold me like I was livestock. Sam had heard rumors of such operations during his years wearing a badge, whispered stories that most lawmen dismissed as frontier tall tales. Women and children disappearing from wagon trains, settlements reporting missing persons that were never found, traders dealing in more than cattle and dry goods. He'd always hoped the stories were exaggerated, products of fear and superstition rather than ugly reality. Looking at this broken woman in his firelight, he realized how naive that hope had been. "What's your name?" he asked as he prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and the last of Martha's preserved peaches. "Elena," she replied. "Elena Vasquez. I was traveling with a wagon train from Santa Fe to Denver. We were going to start a new life, my brother Carlos and me. Our parents died of fever last year, and we sold everything to pay for passage west." She accepted the plate of food he offered with trembling hands, eating with the desperate hunger of someone who'd learned not to waste any opportunity for sustenance. Sam waited patiently for her to continue, knowing that some stories could only be told in pieces. "The wagon master was a man named William Garrett," Elena continued between careful bites. "He seemed honest enough when we hired him, had letters of recommendation from families he'd guided safely to California. But 3 days out of Santa Fe, everything changed." Her voice grew distant, as if she were seeing the events play out again in her mind. "We stopped at a trading post near Rayton Pass. Garrett said we needed supplies, but I noticed he spent a long time talking privately with the trader. That night, men came to our camp, armed men who knew exactly where to find what they wanted." Sam's hands clenched into fists as he began to understand the scope of the betrayal. "Garrett sold you. Not just me." There were 3 other young women traveling alone, and a family with 2 daughters. "The men separated us from the rest of the travelers, said there had been reports of Apache raids and they were taking us to safety." Elena's laugh was bitter, empty of humor. "Carlos tried to stop them. He was only 19, but he drew his pistol and demanded they let us go." She stopped eating, her appetite lost to memory. "They shot him down like a dog. Laughed while he bled out in the dirt. Said that's what happened to men who didn't know their place." Sam rose from his chair and moved to the window, ostensibly to check the storm's progress, but really to hide the murderous fury that threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained composure. 20 years of law enforcement had taught him to control his emotions, to think tactically rather than react emotionally. But listening to Elena's story tested every ounce of that hard-won discipline. "How long ago?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. 4 months, maybe 5. Time loses meaning when you're kept in a place where the sun only reaches through barred windows. Elena set down her fork, her small meal apparently sufficient to restore some of her strength. "They moved us around, never staying in one place too long. Different camps, different buyers, always heading further from civilization where no one would think to look." "Do you know where they took you? Names, locations, anything that might help track them?" Elena studied his profile against the window, beginning to understand that his questions weren't idle curiosity. "You're thinking of going after them." "I'm thinking that men like that don't stop until someone stops them," Sam replied, turning back to face her. "How many others like you are still out there?" "At the last camp, there were 8 of us, maybe more by now." Elena's voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if giving voice to the truth was somehow liberating. "They keep us weak, barely fed, always moving so we never learn the routes. But I watched, I listened, I memorized everything I could because I swore to myself that someday I'd find a way to use it against them." Sam returned to his chair, leaning forward intently. "Tell me everything you remember. Every detail, no matter how small it seems." For the next hour, Elena painted a picture of systematic cruelty and criminal organization that went far beyond simple kidnapping. The operation was sophisticated, with multiple camps, established trade routes, and buyers throughout the territories who paid premium prices for women and children who could be easily controlled. "The leader called himself Jake Morrison," Elena said. "Big man, maybe 40 years old, with a scar across his left cheek and gold teeth in front. He wore expensive clothes and carried a fancy engraved pistol, acted like he was some kind of gentleman businessman." Sam's blood went cold. He knew that name, had been tracking rumors about Jake Morrison's activities for months before his retirement. Morrison was suspected of everything from cattle rustling to claim jumping, but human trafficking was a new and horrifying addition to his list of crimes. Morrison's got money behind him, Elena continued. Real money, not just what he makes from selling people. I heard him talking about investors, about expanding the operation into new territories. He's not just some frontier outlaw, he's building an empire. And you escaped? Elena's hand moved to her torn shawl, pulling it tighter around her shoulders. 2 nights ago, there was a storm. Lightning spooked the horses and started a fire in one of the supply tents. In the confusion, I managed to slip away from the camp. I've been walking ever since, hiding during the day, following the creek beds at night. She looked down at her bloody feet, evidence of her desperate flight across rough terrain. I saw your light and thought, I hoped maybe you were the kind of man who wouldn't turn away someone in need. Sam studied this remarkable woman who'd endured months of captivity and abuse, yet still possessed the courage to escape and the intelligence to provide detailed information about her captors. Martha would have liked her, he thought, would have admired her strength and determination to survive. Elena, he said carefully, if I were to go after Morrison and his operation, would you be willing to help? Your knowledge of their camps and routines could make the difference between success and failure. Elena's eyes widened, hope and fear warring in her expression. You'd really do that? Risk your life for women you don't even know? I spent 20 years wearing a badge because I believe that good people deserve protection from evil ones, Sam replied. Retiring from law enforcement doesn't mean retiring from doing what's right. But there are so many of them. Morrison has at least a dozen men, maybe more. You'd be going up against impossible odds. Sam smiled grimly, the expression transforming his weathered features into something that would have made Jake Morrison think twice about his life choices. Elena, during the war, I was at Antietam and Gettysburg. I've faced down Apache war parties, cattle rustlers, and claim jumpers who thought superior numbers guaranteed victory. The thing about bullies and predators is that they're usually cowards at heart. They prey on the weak because they can't face anyone who fights back. He rose and moved to the gun rack mounted on the wall, taking down his rifle and checking its action with practiced efficiency. Besides, I won't be going alone if you're willing to guide me. And surprise is worth more than superior numbers if you use it right. Elena watched him prepare his weapons, seeing something in his movements that spoke of deadly competence and unwavering resolve. You really think we can free them? All of them? I think we're going to try, Sam said simply. And I think Jake Morrison is about to learn why they called me Iron Sam Crawford back when I was keeping the peace in Deadwood. Outside, the storm was beginning to weaken, its fury spent against the unyielding stone and timber of Sam's cabin. But inside, a different kind of storm was gathering, one that would soon sweep across the Colorado territory like a righteous wind, carrying justice to those who'd forgotten what the word meant. Elena Vasquez had come to his door seeking shelter from the night. Instead, she'd found a man willing to ride into hell itself to ensure that other women would never suffer as she had suffered. And for the first time in 4 months, she allowed herself to believe that salvation might be possible after all. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Colorado plains, the storm's fury finally spent, but leaving behind a world transformed by ice and snow. Sam had barely slept, his mind churning through tactical possibilities while Elena rested fitfully in Martha's old rocking chair by the fire. Every few hours she'd wake with a start, her eyes wide with terror until she remembered where she was and who had given her shelter. Sam understood that kind of sleep. He'd experienced it himself during the war, when every shadow might hide an enemy, and every sound could mean death. The difference was that his nightmares had eventually faded with time and distance. Elena's were still fresh, still real, because the men who'd created them were still out there. You're planning something, Elena said quietly as Sam prepared coffee over the rekindled fire. She'd been watching him for the past hour, noting the way he moved with renewed purpose, the calculating look in his eyes as he studied the rough map he'd sketched based on her descriptions. I'm planning several things, Sam admitted, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups and handing her one. The question is, which plan gives us the best chance of success with the least risk to innocent lives. Elena studied the map, recognizing the landmarks she'd described transformed into strategic positions on Sam's tactical drawing. "You're thinking like a soldier, not a lawman." "Sometimes there's no difference," Sam replied. "When you're facing an enemy who doesn't respect the law, you have to meet them on terms they understand." He'd spent most of the night considering their options, each plan more dangerous than the last. A direct assault on Morrison's camp would be suicide against superior numbers. Calling in federal marshals would take weeks, assuming they believed the story and could spare the men. By then, Morrison would have moved his operation or sold his current prisoners to buyers in distant territories. "Tell me about the camp layout again," Sam said, settling into his chair with a fresh piece of paper. "Every detail you can remember." Elena closed her eyes, calling up memories she'd tried desperately to forget. "The main camp is in a box canyon about 2 days' ride northeast of here. The only way in or out is through a narrow passage between 2 rock walls, maybe 20 feet wide at the entrance." She opened her eyes and began sketching alongside Sam's notes. "Morrison's smart about defense. He keeps guards posted at the entrance around the clock, usually 2 men with rifles. The canyon opens up into a valley maybe half a mile long, with a creek running down the middle. Buildings? 3 main structures. Morrison's cabin is at the far end, built against the back wall of the canyon where no one can approach unseen. The men's bunkhouse is near the entrance, close enough to respond to any threat. And the prison," Elena's voice faltered for a moment. "The prison is a converted storage building in the middle of the valley. Stone walls, barred windows, 1 door with a lock that Morrison keeps the key to." Sam studied her additions to the map, his tactical mind immediately grasping the challenges they faced. "What about guards on the prison itself?" "Usually 1 man during the day, sometimes none at night. Morrison figures the canyon walls and the locked door are security enough." Elena's expression hardened. "He's probably right. Even if someone could pick the lock, where would they run? The only way out is past the guards at the entrance." "Unless someone created a distraction," Sam mused. "Something big enough to draw attention away from the prison." "What kind of distraction?" Sam's smile was grim. "The kind that involves dynamite and very loud noises." Elena stared at him. "You have dynamite?" "I have friends who have dynamite. Mining country, remember? Sometimes you need to move rocks that don't want to be moved." Sam made another note on his map. "But that's getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need intelligence. Current numbers, guard rotations, any changes since your escape." "How do we get that without being seen?" "We scout carefully and we scout smart," Sam replied. "But there's something else we need to consider. Even if we free those women, where do they go? They'll need medical attention, safe passage to their families, or somewhere they can start over. We can't just blow up Morrison's camp and hope for the best." Elena hadn't considered the aftermath of rescue, her focus entirely on the immediate goal of freeing the prisoners. "There's a mission in Colorado Springs that helps women in difficult situations. Sister Catherine runs it, takes in anyone who needs sanctuary." "I know Sister Catherine," Sam said with approval. "Good woman, doesn't ask too many questions about a person's past." "That could work for some of them, but others might have families searching for them." "Morrison keeps records," Elena said suddenly. "I saw him writing in a ledger book, keeping track of where each woman came from, how much he paid for them, potential buyers. He's methodical about it." "Then we make sure to grab that book when we hit the camp," Sam decided. "Information like that could help reunite families and put Morrison's entire network out of business." They spent the morning refining their plan, with Elena providing detailed intelligence about Morrison's operation, while Sam worked out the tactical challenges. The more they discussed, the more complex the mission became. They weren't just planning a rescue, they were planning the destruction of an entire criminal enterprise. "There's something else," Elena said as they prepared a simple lunch. "Morrison mentioned investors, people backing his operation with serious money. This isn't just about him. There are others involved, probably respectable businessmen who profit from misery while keeping their hands clean." Sam paused in his meal preparation. "Did you hear any names?" "A few. Judge Harrison in Denver was mentioned, and someone called the Colonel, who apparently has connections in territorial government. Morrison was careful about details, but he liked to brag about his important friends. The implications chilled Sam more than the morning cold. If Morrison had protection from corrupt officials, a simple rescue mission might bring down federal retaliation on anyone involved. But the alternative, allowing the operation to continue, was unthinkable. Elena, Sam said carefully, once we start this, there's no going back. Morrison and his backers will hunt us to the ends of the earth if any of them survive. Are you prepared for that kind of life? Elena met his gaze steadily. I've been living in hell for 4 months. Being hunted by evil men can't be worse than being owned by them. It can be, Sam said honestly. Freedom comes with its own dangers, its own responsibilities. Once you're free, you'll have to decide who you want to be, what kind of life you want to build. That's harder than it sounds after what you've been through. Then I'll learn, Elena replied with quiet determination, and I'll help other women learn too. Morrison stole 4 months of my life, but he doesn't get to steal my future. Sam felt a surge of admiration for this remarkable woman who'd survived unimaginable cruelty, yet still possessed the strength to fight for others. Martha would have liked her immensely, would have respected her courage and her refusal to be broken by evil men. All right then, Sam said, rising from the table with renewed purpose. Let's get to work. They spent the afternoon preparing equipment and supplies. Sam cleaned and checked his weapons while Elena helped prepare medical supplies and provisions for the rescued women. As the day wore on, their partnership developed naturally, each instinctively understanding their role in the dangerous mission ahead. Tell me about yourself, Elena said as they worked side by side preparing bandages and medicine packets. Before you were a lawman, before you came to Colorado, what made you want to fight for justice? Sam was quiet for a long moment, his hands continuing their methodical work, while his mind traveled back through decades of memory. I grew up in Kansas during the border wars, saw what happened when good people didn't stand up to bad ones. My father was killed by raiders when I was 16, murdered for the crime of trying to protect his neighbor's farms. He set down the bandage he'd been rolling and looked directly at Elena. I swore that day that I'd never let evil men triumph if I could prevent it. That oath didn't end when I turned in my badge. And your wife? Martha? Sam's expression softened with remembered love and lingering grief. Martha understood what drove me, supported it even when it meant months apart while I tracked outlaws across 3 territories. She said that a man who wouldn't fight for what's right wasn't worth having as a husband. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was. And she would have liked you, Elena. Would have admired your strength and your determination to help others despite your own suffering. Elena felt tears sting her eyes at the unexpected kindness in his words. Do you think it's possible to heal from something like this? To become whole again? Sam studied her face, seeing both the damage and the unbroken spirit beneath it. I think healing is like building anything worthwhile. It takes time, effort, and the right materials. The question isn't whether you can heal, Elena. The question is what kind of person you want to become once you do. As evening approached, they finalized their preparations. Tomorrow they would begin the journey to Morrison's Canyon, starting with reconnaissance that would determine whether their desperate plan had any chance of success. Are you ready for this? Sam asked as they secured their supplies. Elena checked the revolver Sam had given her, feeling its unfamiliar weight on her hip. I've been ready since the day they killed my brother. The only question now is whether Morrison is ready for us. Sam smiled at her fierce determination. Jake Morrison had built his empire on the assumption that his victims were helpless, that no one would risk everything to save people society had written off as lost. Tomorrow he would discover how wrong that assumption could be. Outside, the wind had died to a whisper, and the first stars were appearing in the clear Colorado sky. It was a good night for planning justice, and an even better night for preparing to deliver it. The pre-dawn darkness held a bite that cut through even Sam's heavy coat as they prepared to leave the cabin. Elena had insisted on coming despite his reservations, and as he watched her methodically check her supplies and weapons, Sam admitted she'd made the right choice. She knew Morrison's operation better than anyone, and her insights could mean the difference between success and walking into a carefully laid trap. Remember, Sam said as they led their horses away from the cabin, We're just scouting today. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We gather information and get out alive. Elena nodded, pulling her hat down low over her distinctive features. If any of Morrison's men see me, they'll raise the alarm immediately. I should stay back while you get closer to the camp. No, Sam replied firmly. We go together or not at all. I need your eyes on that canyon. Need you to spot any changes since your escape. But we'll be careful about it. They rode northeast through terrain that grew progressively more rugged as they left the plains behind. Elena guided them along game trails and creek beds that would hide their passage from casual observation, her memory of the escape route proving invaluable. Despite her months of captivity, she'd retained an impressive awareness of the landscape. You'd have made a good scout during the war, Sam observed as they paused to water their horses at a hidden spring. Carlos taught me to read the land when we were children. Said a person who couldn't find their way home wasn't worth much in country like this. Elena's voice carried a mixture of pride and grief when she spoke of her dead brother. He was going to be a guide, help families heading west. Said there was good money in keeping people safe. Sam heard the pain in her words and understood it. The war had taught him that the hardest losses were often those tied to dreams that would never be fulfilled. Tell me about him, Elena smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Sam had seen from her. Carlos was 3 years younger than me, but he acted like my big brother, always getting into fights with boys who said things about our family, always making sure I had enough to eat even when times were hard. When our parents died, he was the one who insisted we head west, said we'd find a place where the past didn't matter. Sounds like a good man. He was. And he'd want me to help those women, even if it meant risking everything. Elena's expression hardened with resolve. Morrison took his life and my freedom, but he doesn't get to take my purpose. They pressed on through the morning, the landscape growing more desolate with each mile. This was country where a person could disappear without a trace, where screams would echo off canyon walls with no one to hear them. Perfect territory for men like Morrison, who dealt in human misery. As they crested a low ridge, Elena suddenly raised her hand for silence. There, she whispered, pointing toward a distant rock formation. That's Sentinel Rock. The canyon entrance is about 2 miles past it. Sam studied the landmark through his field glasses, noting the strategic advantages it offered. Anyone approaching Morrison's Canyon would have to cross open ground under observation from multiple vantage points. Smart positioning. He can see trouble coming from miles away. That's why no one's ever found the camp, Elena said. By the time lawmen get close enough to investigate, Morrison's had hours to prepare or evacuate. They dismounted and proceeded on foot, using every available scrap of cover to avoid detection. Sam's military training served them well as they worked their way closer to the canyon entrance, moving with the patience of hunters who understood that haste could be fatal. The first guard post came into view an hour before noon, exactly where Elena had predicted it would be. 2 men with rifles sat in the shade of an overhanging rock, their position offering a clear view of all approaches while remaining largely hidden from casual observation. Professionals, Sam muttered, studying their positioning and equipment through his glasses. Military training, probably veterans looking for easy money. Elena studied the guards, her face pale with recognition. The one on the left is Garrett. He was with the wagon train when they first took us. I thought he was just a guide, but he was working for Morrison all along. Sam felt his jaw clench at this confirmation of betrayal. Wagon train guides were supposed to protect their charges, not deliver them to human traffickers. What about the other one? Don't recognize him. Probably new since my escape. Elena's voice carried a mixture of fear and determination. Morrison's always recruiting, promises big money for men willing to do ugly work. They spent the next 2 hours observing the guard rotation and studying the canyon entrance. Sam made detailed notes of timing, positioning, and the natural features that could be used to advantage or disadvantage depending on the approach. The narrow passage Elena had described was even more defensible than he'd imagined, with high walls that would channel any assault into a fatal bottleneck. We need to see the camp itself, Sam finally decided. Can we get above the canyon rim without being spotted? Elena considered this, calling up memories of the landscape from her desperate escape. There's a game trail that leads up the backside of the western wall. It's steep and dangerous, but it should give us a view into the valley. The climb took the better part of an hour, their horses left hidden in a grove of stunted pines while they worked their way up a treacherous path that seemed designed to break necks and dash hopes. Sam's arthritis complained bitterly about the exertion, but he pressed on, driven by the knowledge that lives depended on the intelligence they gathered. The view from the canyon rim took his breath away, and not just from the altitude. Morrison's operation was even more extensive than Elena's descriptions had suggested. The main camp sprawled across the valley floor like a small town, with additional buildings and corrals that spoke of permanent settlement rather than temporary criminal enterprise. Jesus, Sam breathed, counting structures and estimating the number of people required to staff such an operation. He's not just trafficking women. This is a complete criminal empire. Elena pointed toward the converted prison at the valley center. There. Those are barred windows. I can see movement inside. Sam focused his field glasses on the building, his heart sinking as he counted shadows behind the iron bars. More than 8 women, looks like 10, maybe 12. He's been busy since I escaped, Elena said grimly. Probably stepped up operations to replace lost inventory. The casual way she used Morrison's commercial terminology spoke volumes about how thoroughly the criminals had dehumanized their victims. Sam made additional notes about guard positions, building layouts, and potential escape routes, while Elena provided context about daily routines and security procedures. There, Elena whispered suddenly, pointing toward Morrison's cabin. That's him. A large man in expensive clothes had emerged from the main building, his bearing and the deference of subordinates clearly marking him as the operations leader. Even at a distance, Sam could see the gold teeth and facial scar Elena had described. Jake Morrison looked exactly like what he was, a successful predator who'd grown fat on human suffering. He's talking to someone, Sam observed, noting a second figure partially hidden by the cabin's porch. Can you see who? Elena strained to make out details through the heat shimmer rising from the valley floor. Whoever it is, they're well-dressed. Not one of Morrison's usual thugs. As they watched, the second figure stepped into clearer view, revealing a man in a fine suit and bowler hat. The kind of clothing worn by bankers, lawyers, or government officials. The kind of person who had no legitimate business in a human trafficking camp. One of the investors you mentioned? Sam asked. Must be. Morrison always cleaned up his act when the money men came calling. Elena's voice carried bitter knowledge. We were always warned to stay quiet when visitors arrived. Morrison said his backers didn't like to see the merchandise. Sam photographed the scene in his memory, knowing that identifying Morrison's financial supporters would be crucial to dismantling the entire network. A rescue mission that left the leadership structure intact would only result in the operation relocating and continuing under new management. We've seen enough, Sam decided as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen. Time to get back and finalize our plan. The descent proved even more treacherous than the climb, with loose rock and steep drops threatening to end their mission before it truly began. By the time they reached their horses, both were exhausted and covered in dust, but they'd gathered intelligence worth the risk. So what do you think? Elena asked as they prepared to return to Sam's cabin. Can it be done? Sam considered everything they'd observed, weighing possibilities against probabilities with the cold calculation of a man who'd planned similar operations during wartime. It can be done, but not the way I originally envisioned. That's not just a criminal camp down there. It's a fortress. We're going to need help. What kind of help? The kind that wears badges and has legal authority to act, Sam replied. But first, we need proof that even corrupt officials can't ignore. We need evidence that will force the territorial government to take action. Elena's expression showed both hope and skepticism. You think they'll listen? Even with Morrison's connections in Denver? I think there are still good people in positions of authority, people who'll act if presented with undeniable proof of what's happening in that canyon. Sam's voice carried grim determination. And I think it's time Jake Morrison learned that his money and influence can't protect him from justice forever. As they rode back toward Sam's cabin, both were lost in thought about the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. The mission had grown from a simple rescue to something much larger, the destruction of an entire criminal network that reached into the highest levels of territorial government. But first, they had to survive long enough to expose the truth. And that meant walking into the lion's den with nothing but courage, determination, and the desperate hope that sometimes righteousness really could triumph over evil. The ride back to Sam's cabin passed in tense silence, both riders lost in thought about the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Colorado plains, and every distant dust cloud or unexpected sound made them both reach instinctively for their weapons. Morrison's operation was larger and more sophisticated than either had imagined, and the presence of well-dressed investors suggested connections that reached far beyond the territories. "We can't do this alone," Sam said finally as his cabin came into view. "What we saw today changes everything." Elena pulled her horse alongside his, studying his weathered profile. "You're thinking of bringing in the law?" "I'm thinking of bringing in the right law," Sam replied carefully. "There are still honest lawmen in Colorado, men who can't be bought or intimidated, but we'll need evidence they can't ignore. Proof so damning that even Morrison's political friends won't be able to protect him." They unsaddled their horses in Sam's small barn, the familiar routine of caring for the animals providing a momentary respite from the weight of their discoveries. As Elena brushed down her mount, Sam noticed how naturally she'd taken to frontier life despite her ordeal. There was strength in her that went beyond mere survival. "Tell me about this evidence," Elena said as they secured the horses for the night. "What kind of proof would convince territorial authorities to act against someone with Morrison's connections?" Sam leaned against the barn door, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Names, dates, financial records. The kind of documentation that shows patterns of criminal activity across multiple jurisdictions. But most importantly, we need witnesses. The women in that prison? Some of them, yes, but also someone from Morrison's organization, someone willing to testify about the scope of the operation in exchange for immunity." Sam's expression grew calculating. "Every criminal enterprise has weak links, people who join for money but lack the stomach for the worst crimes." Elena considered this as they walked back to the cabin. There might be someone, a man named Dutch Carroll who works as Morrison's bookkeeper. He handles the financial records, keeps track of transactions and territories. "I heard him arguing with Morrison once about expanding too fast, bringing too much attention." "Arguing how?" "Carroll was worried about federal investigation, said the operation was getting too big to stay hidden. Morrison laughed it off, said his friends in Denver would handle any problems." Elena's voice carried the bitter memory, but Carroll looked scared, like a man who knew he was in over his head. Sam filed this information away as they entered the cabin. A frightened bookkeeper with access to financial records could indeed be the key to bringing down Morrison's entire network. But approaching such a man would require careful planning and considerable risk. "There's something else," Elena said as Sam rekindled the fire. "I saw a woman today watching from one of the prison windows. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her at first." "And now you have?" "Sarah Martinez. She was the postmaster's daughter in Santa Fe. Disappeared about 6 months ago. Her father offered a $1,000 reward for information about her whereabouts." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "Morrison's been taking women from established communities, not just isolated wagon trains. People with families, with resources to search for them." The implications sent a chill through Sam's blood. If Morrison was kidnapping women from settled communities, their disappearances would eventually attract federal attention. The man was either supremely confident in his protection or dangerously reckless about exposure. "That changes our timeline," Sam said grimly. "If Sarah Martinez's father has been searching for 6 months, he's probably contacted every law enforcement agency in the territory by now. Federal marshals could already be investigating. Is that good or bad for our plans?" "Depends on which marshals are assigned to the case," Sam replied. "Some are honest men who will follow evidence wherever it leads. Others can be bought or intimidated like any other officials." A distant sound interrupted their conversation, hoofbeats approaching from the east at a measured pace that suggested official business rather than casual travel. Sam moved to the window, peering through the darkness at 2 riders approaching his cabin with deliberate purpose. "Expecting company?" Elena asked, her hand moving instinctively to the revolver at her hip. "No, but that doesn't mean they're hostile," Sam replied, though his own hand rested on his rifle. "Stay inside while I see what they want." The riders stopped just outside the circle of light cast by the cabin's windows. One called out in a voice that carried authority and careful politeness. "Mr. Crawford, Deputy Marshal Jake Wilson, Territorial Service. I'd like a word if you don't mind." Sam recognized the name, if not the voice. Wilson had a reputation as an honest lawman, one of the few federal officers who couldn't be bought or intimidated. His presence could be either salvation or catastrophe, depending on what had brought him to this isolated cabin. "Come ahead, Marshal," Sam called back, stepping onto his porch with the rifle held casually but ready. "What brings federal law enforcement to my door?" Wilson dismounted and approached slowly, his hands visible and empty of weapons. He was a tall, lean man in his 40s with intelligent eyes and the careful movements of someone accustomed to danger. His companion remained mounted but alert, covering the conversation without appearing threatening. "We're investigating reports of criminal activity in this area," Wilson said without preamble. "Human trafficking specifically. Word is that you might have information relevant to our inquiry." Sam's mind raced through possibilities. Either Wilson was one of the honest marshals, or this was an elaborate trap set by Morrison's allies in law enforcement. The next few minutes would determine whether Elena's rescue became possible or whether they both faced arrest or worse. "What makes you think I'd know anything about human trafficking?" Sam asked carefully. "Because a witness saw a woman matching the description of an escaped captive near your property 2 days ago," Wilson replied. "And because your reputation suggests you're the kind of man who'd help someone in that situation." Elena appeared in the cabin doorway, her decision made despite Sam's instructions to stay inside. "I'm the woman you're looking for, Marshal. My name is Elena Vasquez, and I escaped from Jake Morrison's operation 3 nights ago." Wilson's sharp intake of breath was audible in the night air. "Miss Vasquez, we've been looking for you for months. Your testimony could be crucial to our investigation." "Could be?" Sam's voice carried a warning edge. "That suggests you already have an investigation underway." "We do," Wilson confirmed. "Morrison's operation has attracted federal attention because of missing persons reports from multiple states and territories. But we've had trouble gathering actionable intelligence." Elena stepped fully onto the porch, her chin raised with determined courage. "I can provide detailed information about Morrison's camps, his methods, and his organization. But I want guarantees about the safety of the women still being held." "What kind of guarantees?" "Immediate rescue operations for the prisoners, protection for witnesses, and prosecution of everyone involved regardless of their political connections." Elena's voice grew stronger with each word. "I won't help you build a case if it means those women suffer while lawyers argue in distant courtrooms." Wilson studied Elena's face, seeing the steel beneath her obvious trauma. "Miss Vasquez, I can promise that any evidence you provide will be acted upon swiftly. But I need to know everything. Names, locations, financial arrangements, political connections, everything." Sam watched this exchange with growing hope. Wilson seemed genuine, and his immediate focus on Elena's welfare rather than bureaucratic procedures suggested honest intentions. But years of law enforcement had taught Sam to remain cautious. "Marshal," Sam said carefully, "before Miss Vasquez shares anything, we need to discuss protection arrangements. Morrison has resources and connections that extend into territorial government. If word leaks about federal investigation, witnesses could disappear permanently." "Understood," Wilson replied. "That's why this conversation is off the books until we're ready to move. My partner and I are operating under special authority from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Denver." Elena looked between the two men, seeing the careful dance of professional lawmen evaluating each other's trustworthiness. "How do we know you're not working for Morrison's allies in government?" Wilson reached into his coat and withdrew an official document sealed with federal marks. "Authorization signed by the territorial governor himself, giving me authority to investigate criminal enterprises without interference from local officials. Morrison's operation has attracted attention at the highest levels." Sam examined the document carefully, his experience with legal papers allowing him to verify its authenticity. "This looks legitimate, but it doesn't guarantee your intentions." "Then let me prove them," Wilson said simply. "Tomorrow morning, I'll take you to our temporary command post where you can verify our credentials and meet our team. If you're satisfied with our legitimacy, Ms. Vasquez can provide her testimony under official protection." Elena felt a surge of hope for the first time since her escape. And the rescue operation? Will begin within 48 hours of receiving actionable intelligence, Wilson promised. We have federal marshals and territorial militia standing by, but we need precise information about guard positions, prisoner locations, and security procedures. I can provide all of that, Elena said without hesitation, but I'm going with you when you hit Morrison's camp. Absolutely not, Sam and Wilson said simultaneously. Elena's eyes flashed with determination. Those women are terrified of uniformed men with guns. They've been conditioned to fear anyone who might represent authority. I'm the only person who can convince them that rescue is real, that they're truly safe. Wilson considered this argument, his tactical mind recognizing its validity. It would be extremely dangerous. Marshal, Elena said quietly, I've been living with extreme danger for 4 months. At least this time I'll be fighting back. Sam studied Elena's face, seeing the same resolve that had carried her through months of captivity and across dangerous terrain to reach his cabin. She's right about the women's reaction to armed strangers, and she knows Morrison's people better than anyone. Wilson nodded slowly. All right, Miss Vasquez. But you follow orders without question, and you stay back until the area is secured. As the marshal and his partner prepared to leave, Elena felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope for justice and freedom for herself and the women still trapped in Morrison's hell. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, but tonight she slept peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that powerful allies were finally joining their fight against evil. The federal command post turned out to be an abandoned mining office 10 miles south of Sam's cabin, its weathered buildings providing perfect cover for an operation that needed to remain invisible to Morrison's network of informants. As Sam and Elena approached with Marshal Wilson at dawn, they could see the careful preparations that spoke of professional law enforcement rather than frontier justice. 6 additional marshals waited inside the main building, along with a territorial militia captain and his sergeant. Maps covered every available surface, marked with reconnaissance notes and tactical assessments that demonstrated weeks of careful planning. Elena felt a surge of hope as she realized the scope of federal commitment to destroying Morrison's operation. Miss Vasquez, Wilson said formally as they entered, I'd like you to meet U.S. Marshal Thomas Henderson, who's leading this operation. Henderson was a grizzled veteran in his 50s, whose weathered face showed the accumulated wisdom of 3 decades pursuing dangerous criminals. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp as he studied Elena, with the careful attention of a man who understood that witness testimony could make or break complex cases. Miss Vasquez, we've been tracking Morrison's operation for 8 months, but we've lacked the detailed intelligence needed for successful prosecution, Henderson said without preamble. Your escape and willingness to testify could be the breakthrough we've needed. Elena settled into a chair beside the main table, studying the maps and documents spread before her. What do you need to know? Everything, Henderson replied. But let's start with the current situation at Morrison's main camp. Guard rotations, prisoner locations, daily routines, escape routes. For the next 2 hours, Elena provided detailed intelligence while the marshals took careful notes and updated their tactical plans. Her memory for detail impressed even the experienced lawmen, particularly her knowledge of security procedures and the psychological control methods Morrison used to keep his victims compliant. The women are kept in a state of learned helplessness, Elena explained, her voice steady despite the painful memories. Morrison uses a combination of physical abuse, psychological manipulation, and deliberate isolation to break their will to resist. They've been conditioned to fear any kind of confrontation, which is why your presence during the rescue will be crucial, Henderson acknowledged. But I need you to understand the dangers involved. Morrison's men are professionals, and they won't hesitate to use the prisoners as human shields if cornered. Sam had remained silent during most of the briefing, but now he leaned forward with the tactical questions of an experienced fighter. What's our approach strategy? That canyon entrance is a natural choke point that could trap an assault force. Captain Mills, the militia officer, indicated a topographical map marked with elevation lines and approach routes. We've identified 3 possible infiltration paths. The main assault will go through the canyon entrance after we neutralize the guards, but we'll also have teams scaling the canyon walls from both sides. Climbing those walls in the dark would be suicide, Elena interjected. The rock is unstable, and Morrison has sentries posted on the rim during night hours. Henderson nodded appreciatively. Exactly the kind of intelligence we needed. What about the morning hours? Guard changes, shift rotations? Dawn is their weakest time, Elena confirmed. Most of the men are either asleep or hung over from the previous night's drinking. Morrison keeps minimal guards on duty, usually just 2 at the entrance and 1 roving patrol in the camp. Then we hit them at first light, Henderson decided. Fast, coordinated, overwhelming force before they can organize resistance or threaten the prisoners. The planning continued through the morning as Elena provided detailed information about Morrison's personnel, their habits and capabilities. She identified key targets like Dutch Carroll, the nervous bookkeeper who might be convinced to cooperate, and warned about Morrison's most dangerous lieutenants who would fight to the death rather than face federal prosecution. There's something else, Elena said as the briefing neared its conclusion. Morrison keeps detailed records of his entire operation, financial transactions, buyer information, political connections. Those ledgers are in a safe in his personal cabin. Henderson's eyes sharpened with interest. That information could expose his entire network, not just the local operation, which is why Morrison will try to destroy it if he realizes the camp is under attack, Sam pointed out. We'll need someone specifically assigned to secure those records. I'll handle that personally, Henderson decided. My priority will be reaching Morrison's cabin and securing those documents before he can burn them. Elena studied the tactical maps, her knowledge of the camp layout allowing her to spot potential problems in the assault plan. The prison building has only 1 entrance, and it's directly across from Morrison's cabin. If he sees federal marshals approaching, his first instinct will be to eliminate the evidence, including the witnesses. The grim implications of this observation settled over the command post like a cold wind. Morrison was the kind of man who would murder his prisoners rather than allow them to testify against him. Then we need a diversion, Sam said, something that draws attention away from both the prison and Morrison's cabin long enough for the assault teams to reach their objectives. Captain Mills indicated the camp's corral and supply areas. Fire works well as a distraction. Create enough smoke and confusion to mask our approach. Fire is too dangerous with innocent lives at stake, Henderson objected. We need something that creates chaos without risking the prisoners. Elena had been studying the maps intently, and now she looked up with a suggestion that surprised everyone. The remuda. Morrison keeps about 50 horses in the main corral. If something spooked them badly enough, they'd stampede through the entire camp. Every man would be focused on saving valuable livestock. How do we spook 50 horses without alerting human guards? Wilson asked. Sam smiled grimly, his military experience providing an answer. Dynamite. Not enough to hurt the animals, but enough to create noise and confusion that would send them running in all directions. Henderson considered this approach, weighing risks against benefits. It could work, but the timing would have to be perfect. Too early and Morrison's men recover before we're in position. Too late and they spot our assault teams. I can handle the timing, Elena said quietly. I know exactly where Morrison sleeps, how long it takes guards to respond to emergencies, which routes the assault teams should use for maximum surprise. Absolutely not, Sam interjected. You're not going into that camp ahead of the assault teams. Too dangerous. It's the only way to guarantee success, Elena replied, with determination that brooked no argument. Those women have been waiting for rescue for months. I won't let poor timing or inadequate intelligence get them killed. Henderson studied Elena's face, seeing the steel beneath her obvious trauma. Miss Vasquez, what exactly are you proposing? I go in alone before dawn, position the explosive charges, and trigger them at exactly the right moment to coordinate with your assault, Elena explained. I know every guard position, every building layout, every security routine. I can get in and out without being detected. And if you're caught, Elena's expression didn't waver, then I buy you time with my life if necessary. Those women are worth the risk. Sam felt his heart clench at her words, recognizing the same selfless courage that had driven him to pin on a badge decades earlier. Elena, there has to be another way. There isn't, she replied simply. And you know it. This is our one chance to hit Morrison's operation before he relocates or eliminates the evidence. We can't afford to fail. Henderson made his decision with the quick authority of a man accustomed to command responsibility. Miss Vasquez, if you're determined to do this, you'll have backup. Marshal Wilson will infiltrate with you, provide cover while you place the charges. I work better alone, Elena protested. Non-negotiable, Henderson replied firmly. You provide the intelligence and local knowledge. Wilson provides the tactical expertise and firepower if things go wrong. Wilson nodded his acceptance of the dangerous assignment. When do we move? Tomorrow morning, Henderson decided. That gives us time for final preparations and equipment checks. Miss Vasquez, you and Wilson will infiltrate at 3 a.m., position the charges, and trigger them at precisely 5:30 when the assault teams are in position. Elena felt a mixture of fear and anticipation as the reality of returning to Morrison's camp settled over her. In less than 24 hours, she would be back in the place where she'd suffered months of abuse and terror. But this time, she wouldn't be a helpless victim. This time, she would be an instrument of justice. There's one more thing, Elena said as the briefing concluded. Morrison has contacts in territorial government, people who've been protecting his operation. If word of this assault leaks, he'll be gone before we arrive. Which is why no one outside this room knows about tomorrow's operation, Henderson assured her. Communications black out until the mission is complete. As the marshals and militia prepared their equipment for the assault, Sam found himself alone with Elena for the first time since their arrival at the command post. Are you sure about this? Once you go back into that canyon, there's no guarantee you'll come out alive. Elena looked at him with eyes that held more strength than fear. Sam, I've been dead inside for 4 months. Tomorrow I either help save those women and truly live again, or I die trying. Either way, I'll finally be free. Sam understood her reasoning, even as it terrified him. He'd felt the same way during the war, when death seemed preferable to continued existence under unbearable circumstances. Then we make sure you come back alive, he said simply. Outside, the sun was setting over the Colorado plains, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood. Tomorrow would bring violence and justice in equal measure, and Elena Vasquez would finally face the demons that had haunted her dreams. But this time, she wouldn't face them alone, and this time, she would be the one holding the weapons. The pre-dawn darkness clung to the Colorado mountains like a shroud as Elena and Marshal Wilson approached Morrison's Canyon on foot, their horses left hidden 2 miles behind with the main assault force. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as familiar landmarks emerged from the gloom, each step bringing her closer to the place where she'd suffered months of torment and degradation. Remember, Wilson whispered as they reached the first guard position, we place the charges, trigger them on schedule, then get clear. No heroics, no deviations from the plan. Elena nodded, though her attention was focused on the sleeping guard slumped against his post. The man's rifle lay across his lap, and a half-empty bottle of whiskey glinted in the starlight beside him. Morrison's discipline had grown slack during her absence, complacency born of months without serious threat. They moved past the guard like ghosts, Elena's intimate knowledge of the camp layout allowing them to avoid the few security measures Morrison had bothered to maintain. The remuda came into view as they crested a small rise, 50 horses dozing peacefully in the large corral that dominated the camp's eastern edge. Perfect positioning, Wilson breathed, studying the tactical advantages Elena had described. When those horses stampede, they'll run straight through the center of camp. Elena pulled the dynamite charges from her pack, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what they were about to unleash. Each stick had been carefully measured to create maximum noise and confusion without seriously injuring the animals. The horses would panic and run, creating the diversion that would allow federal marshals to rescue the imprisoned women. Charges set, Elena whispered as she positioned the last explosive device. 15 minutes until detonation. They began working their way toward the prison building, Elena's memory guiding them through shadows and around obstacles that could betray their presence. The converted warehouse sat exactly where she remembered, its barred windows and heavy door, a monument to human cruelty in the midst of natural beauty. Movement in one of the windows caught Elena's attention, and she felt her breath catch as she recognized a familiar face. Sarah Martinez, the postmaster's daughter from Santa Fe, was awake and watching the darkness, with the desperate hope of someone who'd never stop believing in rescue. "They're still there," Elena whispered to Wilson. "At least 10 women, maybe more." Wilson checked his pocket watch, the luminous dial showing precious minutes ticking away. "Assault teams should be in position now. 5 minutes until we trigger the charges." But as they prepared to withdraw to a safe distance, a new sound shattered the pre-dawn quiet. Footsteps approaching from Morrison's cabin, accompanied by voices that carried the urgent tone of men discussing serious business. "The federal marshal situation is becoming problematic," a cultured voice was saying. "My sources in Denver indicate increased interest in territorial trafficking operations." Elena recognized the voice as belonging to the well-dressed visitor they'd observed from the canyon rim. One of Morrison's political protectors, here to discuss damage control for an operation that had grown too large to hide. "Let them investigate," Morrison's rougher voice replied. "They'll find nothing but empty camps and cold trails. We're moving the entire operation to New Mexico territory within the week. And the current inventory? Liquidated. Can't risk leaving witnesses who might talk to federal authorities." The casual way Morrison discussed murdering the imprisoned women sent ice through Elena's veins. The rescue operation had come just in time, but only if they could prevent Morrison from carrying out his murderous plans. Wilson heard the same conversation, his face grim with the knowledge that they were witnessing the planning of mass murder. He checked his watch again, 2 minutes until the charges detonated, but Morrison and his visitor were moving toward the prison building. "Change of plans," Wilson whispered. "I'm going after Morrison now before he reaches the prisoners." "That's not the mission," Elena protested. "We're supposed to create the diversion and withdraw." "The mission just changed," Wilson replied, checking his weapons. "I can't let him murder those women while we wait for backup." Elena watched Wilson begin moving toward Morrison's position, then made a decision that would have horrified Sam Crawford if he'd known about it. Instead of withdrawing to safety, she began working her way toward the prison building from the opposite direction. The charges detonated exactly on schedule. The thunderous explosion sending 50 terrified horses stampeding through Morrison's camp in a chaos of dust, screaming animals, and shouting men. Elena used the confusion to reach the prison door, her lock-picking skills learned during childhood in Santa Fe, finally serving a noble purpose. "Sarah," she called through the bars. "Sarah Martinez." "It's Elena Vasquez. I've come to get you out." The door's lock surrendered to her desperate efforts just as federal marshals poured into the canyon from 3 directions, their battle cries echoing off the stone walls as they engaged Morrison's men in fierce gunfights throughout the camp. "Elena!" Sarah's voice was weak with disbelief. "Is it really you?" "It's me, and I've brought help," Elena confirmed, throwing open the prison door. "Federal marshals are here to rescue everyone. We need to get you all to safety." 12 women emerged from the converted warehouse, their faces showing the same mixture of hope and terror Elena remembered from her own captivity. Some were barely more than girls. Others were mothers whose children were probably still searching for them. All bore the physical and psychological scars of Morrison's systematic cruelty. "Stay together," Elena commanded, her voice carrying an authority born of survival and determination. "Follow me and do exactly what I say. We're going home." She led the group of freed prisoners toward the designated extraction point while gunfire continued to rage throughout the camp. Federal marshals had gained the upper hand quickly, their superior training and coordinated assault overwhelming Morrison's disorganized resistance. "Elena!" Marshal Henderson's voice called from near Morrison's cabin. "We've secured the records, but Morrison's escaped into the canyon." Elena felt fury surge through her veins at the news. After everything they'd endured, after all the planning and risk, the man responsible for so much suffering was going to escape justice once again. "Get the women to safety," she told Sarah Martinez. "The marshals will take care of you from here." "Where are you going?" Sarah asked with growing alarm. "To finish this," Elena replied, drawing the revolver Sam had given her. She found Morrison's trail easily enough, blood drops in the dust marking his passage toward the canyon's back wall, where ancient Pueblo ruins provided hiding places among the rocks. Marshal Wilson was already following the trail, his rifle ready as he tracked the wounded criminal through increasingly treacherous terrain. "Morrison!" Wilson called out as they approached a cluster of stone buildings. "You're surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Morrison's answer came in the form of rifle fire from the ruins, bullets whining off stone as the desperate criminal fought to avoid capture. But Elena knew these ruins from her escape route reconnaissance, knew there was only one way out of the box canyon Morrison had trapped himself in. She circled around while Wilson kept Morrison pinned down, working her way to the narrow passage that was the criminal's only escape route. When Morrison finally made his break for freedom, she was waiting for him. "Hello, Jake," she said calmly, her revolver trained on his chest. Morrison stopped dead, his rifle lowering as he stared at the woman he'd brutalized for months. "Elena? Should have known you'd be involved in this. You killed my brother. You destroyed my life. You were planning to murder those women rather than face justice?" Elena's voice was steady, controlled. "Any last words?" Morrison's face twisted with the arrogance that had always defined him. "You don't have the courage to pull that trigger, girl. You're still the same broken woman I—" Elena's bullet cut off his words permanently. Morrison fell backward into the dust, his reign of terror ended by the woman he'd thought too broken to fight back. Marshal Wilson appeared moments later, taking in the scene with professional assessment. "Clean shooting," he observed. "Self-defense, I'd say." "I'd say so too," Elena agreed, holstering her weapon. As federal marshals secured the camp and began the process of caring for the rescued women, Elena found herself standing at the canyon entrance, where her nightmare had begun 4 months earlier. But now the nightmare was over, ended by courage, determination, and the unwavering belief that justice could triumph over evil. Sam Crawford was waiting with the horses, his weathered face showing relief and pride as Elena emerged from the canyon. "It's over," she said simply. "Yes," Sam agreed, pulling her into his arms. "It's over. And you're free." Above them, the first light of dawn painted the Colorado sky in shades of gold and hope, marking the beginning of a new day for Elena Vasquez and 12 other women who would never again have to fear the monsters that had once owned their lives. 3 months after the destruction of Jake Morrison's criminal empire, Elena Vasquez stood on the porch of Sam Crawford's cabin, watching the sun rise over the Colorado plains that had once seemed like a prison, but now felt like home. The federal investigation had uncovered a trafficking network that stretched across 5 territories, leading to dozens of arrests and the rescue of over 40 women and children. The territorial newspapers had called it the largest law enforcement operation in Colorado history. The politicians had praised federal efficiency and territorial cooperation, but for Elena, the true victory was much simpler. 12 women had gone home to families who'd never stopped searching for them. Sarah Martinez had returned to Santa Fe, where her father's tears of joy had been witnessed by half the town. 3 other women had been reunited with husbands who'd traveled hundreds of miles following desperate leads. The others had found new lives in communities that welcomed them without questions about their past. Elena had chosen to stay with Sam, not from gratitude or dependence, but from something deeper that had grown between them during their shared fight for justice. What had begun as shelter from a storm had become a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. "The Henderson letter came yesterday," Sam said, joining her on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. "Federal marshals want to know if we'd consider working with them on similar cases." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, considering the offer that had been expected ever since Marshal Henderson had witnessed her courage during the rescue operation. "What do you think?" "I think there are other Morrison operations out there, other women who need help," Sam replied. "And I think we make a good team." Elena smiled, remembering the broken woman who'd stumbled to this cabin seeking only survival. That woman felt like a stranger now, replaced by someone stronger, someone who'd learned that healing came not from forgetting trauma, but from transforming it into purpose. "We'd travel together," she asked. "Wouldn't have it any other way," Sam confirmed. "The frontier's a dangerous place for partners who don't trust each other completely." Elena looked out over the peaceful landscape, then at the man who'd risked everything to help a stranger. "Then yes, Marshal Henderson. We accept." 6 weeks later, they received their first official assignment, reports of missing women near mining camps in Montana Territory. As they prepared to leave Colorado, Elena felt none of the fear that had once defined her existence. Instead, she felt purpose, determination, and the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced the worst humanity could offer and survived to fight another day. Sam Crawford had found his calling again, not as a solitary lawman, but as part of a team dedicated to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Elena Vasquez had found something even more precious: the knowledge that survival wasn't enough, that true healing came from ensuring others never suffered as she had suffered. Together, they rode toward new challenges and new opportunities to deliver justice to those who thought themselves above the law. The West was still wild, still dangerous, but it was also becoming a place where predators learned to fear their prey. If this story of courage, justice, and redemption moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible Wild West tales. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever stood up for someone who couldn't defend themselves? What would you do if faced with the kind of evil Sam and Elena fought against? Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest frontier adventures. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest victories come from helping others find their strength. Thanks for riding along with us on this Wild West journey. Keep fighting the good fight, and we'll see you in the next story.